She was paid to marry a dying millionaire, but he survived and wanted her forever. She thought it was just a 6-month deal, marry a dying millionaire, take the money, and walk away. But fate had a cruel, beautiful twist waiting he lived. Hello everyone, please subscribe to stay with our billionaire love stories. Comment on your country or city. We'd love to see how far these hearts connect. Your support keeps every love story alive for everyone. Now let's dive into today's story of love and fate. The city never slept. Its heartbeat echoed through the endless hum of traffic, the glow of billboards, the faint sirens rolling down Fifth Avenue. Inside a tiny nurse's apartment in Queens, Isabella Moore, 26, sat at her kitchen table staring at a pile of unpaid bills. Her mom's old stethoscope still hung by the door, a quiet reminder of everything she'd lost. It had been 8 months since her mother's passing, and the medical school debt still hunted her. Every call from the bank felt like a countdown. Every morning felt heavier than the last. So when the phone rang that Thursday afternoon with a call from Blackwell & Co., a law firm she'd never heard of, she almost didn't pick up. Miss Moore, a calm voice, said, "Our client would like to discuss a private health care arrangement. It's well paid, fully legal, and time-sensitive." She frowned. "What kind of arrangement?" The voice hesitated. "It involves marriage." "A temporary one." She almost laughed. "You're kidding, right?" "No, ma'am. Our client, Mr. Ethan Ward, requires a legal spouse to fulfill the final clause in his grandmother's will. He's currently undergoing end-stage heart treatment, and he doesn't have long." Isabella froze. She'd heard of Ethan Ward, the reclusive millionaire from Manhattan, a finance prodigy who vanished from headlines after a heart condition forced him to retire early. "We'll offer $500,000, the lawyer continued, plus full coverage of your student debt. In return, you'll remain married for 6 months, or until the client's condition worsens." Her heartbeat stumbled. $500,000. That amount could erase everything: the debt, the fear, the constant surviving. But the thought of marrying a dying stranger felt like crossing a line she couldn't see the end of. That night, she sat by her window, watching the city lights shimmer across the East River. A cold wind brushed her face, and for the first time in years, she whispered a prayer she wasn't sure anyone heard. "Mom, what would you do if helping someone meant selling a part of your soul?" The next morning, a black car waited in front of her building. A man in a gray suit stepped out, handing her an envelope with a single gold-embossed card. "Ethan Ward, private residence, Manhattan. Appointment 9:30 a.m. Her hands trembled as she looked up at the skyline. This wasn't a dream. This was her one chance, or her biggest mistake. She took a deep breath, grabbed her mother's stethoscope for courage, and whispered to herself, "All right, Isabella, let's see what a dying millionaire looks like." Then she stepped into the car, unaware that this drive would change the rest of her life. The elevator doors opened to a world Isabella had never seen before. Marble floors gleamed beneath her shoes. A wall of glass revealed the skyline where morning sunlight painted the Hudson gold. Everything about the penthouse screamed wealth, but none of it felt alive. A woman in a black suit met her at the door. "Mr. Ward is expecting you," she said quietly. Her voice held that careful tone people used when speaking around hospitals. Isabella followed her down a silent hallway until they reached a living room that looked more like an art museum than a home. There, by the window, stood Ethan Ward. He was taller than she expected. His frame leaned beneath a gray sweater. A faint oxygen tube rested near his chair, but his posture was sharp, commanding. When he turned, she noticed his eyes clear gray and colder than the skyline behind him. "So," he said, his tone dry, "you're the one they found to marry me." She blinked, caught off guard. "I was told you needed medical assistance, not a wife," he smirked. "Well, technically, you'd be both." The silence stretched between them. Outside, a seagull crossed the skyline. Inside, the air felt heavy enough to break. "I'm not doing this for love," he said finally. "This is business. You'll be compensated. You'll attend public events, smile when needed, and sign whatever paperwork my lawyers prepare. When it's over, you'll walk away with your money." Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "I'm not doing this for love either," she replied, "but I don't fake compassion." Something flickered in his eyes, a brief crack in the marble wall around him. He turned back toward the window, his reflection blurred against the morning light. "You'll move in next week," he said simply. "My assistant will handle the details." Isabella nodded, holding her breath as she turned to leave. Her pulse echoed in her ears, half fear, half disbelief. At the door, his voice stopped her. "Miss Moore," he said without looking back, "whatever you think this is, it isn't." She hesitated, then walked away whispering to herself, "We'll see about that." Outside, the city buzzed like nothing had changed, but something inside her had. For the first time, pity and curiosity tangled in her chest, and she didn't know which one would win. The wedding happened quietly, like a business deal sealed behind velvet curtains. No guests, no flowers, only a notary, 2 signatures, and the faint hum of a piano playing somewhere down the hall. Isabella stood beside Ethan in the marble lounge of his penthouse, her simple white dress looking almost out of place against the luxury around her. He wore a charcoal suit, sharp and precise, like everything about him. When the notary finished reading the vows, he didn't look at her. He only said, "I do," as if he were confirming a meeting. When it was her turn, her voice caught, but she managed, "I do." Just like that, they were husband and wife. Legally, completely strangers. That night, the city lights glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Isabella sat on the edge of the guest room bed, staring at the gold ring on her hand. It felt foreign cold, a reminder of how far she'd stepped from her old life. She heard the faint sound of Ethan's footsteps in the hallway, steady, measured, deliberate. He moved like a man who had spent years controlling everything around him except his own heartbeat. Days blurred into weeks. Their conversation stayed brief, mostly about his medication-scheduled doctor visits and public appearances to keep up the image of a happy couple. At dinner, she'd ask, "How was your day?" He'd reply, "I survived another one." Every exchange was a wall, every silence a mile between them. One afternoon, she found him in the library surrounded by half-read books and untouched tea. The oxygen tank beside him hissed softly. "You skipped your treatment again," she said quietly. He didn't look up. "I don't need another lecture. You're pushing yourself too hard. You can't just stop your medication." He finally glanced at her, his eyes sharp but tired. "I've spent 10 years fighting a clock I can't stop. You don't get to tell me how to lose." Her chest tightened. This isn't losing Ethan, this is giving up. He stood, anger flickering beneath the calm mask he always wore. "You don't know what it's like to wake up every day wondering if your heart will make it through lunch." She stepped closer. "You're right. I don't know that. But I know what it's like to watch someone stop fighting and how it destroys everyone who loves them." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Silence filled the room. He turned away, but his hands trembled slightly. Finally he said, "You think I'm afraid of dying?" She shook her head. "No, I think you're afraid of living long enough to care again." His jaw tightened, but he didn't reply. She picked up the untouched cup of tea and placed it gently in front of him. "Drink it while it's warm," she whispered, then turned to leave. That night, he couldn't sleep. The house was silent, but her words replayed in his mind like the faint ticking of a clock he couldn't ignore. Down the hallway, light spilled from under her door. She was still awake, writing notes for his next appointment. Her handwriting, neat, patient, like she believed he'd live long enough to need them. For the first time in years, Ethan wondered if he actually could. And for the first time, Isabella realized that beneath the wealth, the sarcasm, and the cold, there was a man who didn't need saving, just a reason to try. The city was slipping into winter. Leaves turned gold along Central Park West, and the morning air bit gently against the glass windows of Ethan Ward's penthouse. Inside, everything remained spotless, almost too perfect, like a place afraid of being touched. But lately, something had begun to change. It started small. Isabella brought home a record player from a thrift shop near 7th Avenue. She set it on the coffee table and played an old jazz record, its crackling notes soft and imperfect. Ethan had been reading his usual posture, stiff behind the morning paper. He looked up, one eyebrow raised. "Why does it sound broken?" She smiled. "It's not broken, it's alive." He didn't answer, but the next morning she found him flipping through the vinyl stack, searching for something else to play. They began sharing breakfast, a quiet routine of eggs, coffee, and occasional sarcasm. Sometimes he'd ask about her nursing work, sometimes about the city, and sometimes he'd just listen while she talked about her mother's kindness. One morning he asked, "Why do you still wear that old stethoscope?" She glanced down at it, looped around her wrist like a bracelet. "It reminds me that every heartbeat matters, even the ones that hurt." His gaze lingered on her longer than usual. He didn't reply, but later that day she found him in the sunroom, without his oxygen tank, breathing slow but steady. The walls between them started to crack. One night, the power went out during a rainstorm. The penthouse was swallowed by darkness. Isabella lit candles in the living room, the scent of cinnamon drifting through the air. She found Ethan sitting by the window, watching the rain blur the skyline. "You should rest," she said softly. "I don't sleep much," he murmured. "Too many unfinished thoughts." She sat across from him, pulling her knees to her chest. Then tell me one of them. He hesitated. Do you ever wonder what people will remember about you when you're gone? She nodded. All the time. But maybe it's not about being remembered. Maybe it's about leaving something kind behind. He looked at her for a long moment, and in that flickering candlelight, his expression softened. You talk like someone who believes in miracles, he said quietly. She smiled. No, I just believe people can surprise themselves. From that night, something shifted. He started eating better, taking short walks on the terrace, even arguing with his doctor about restarting his physical therapy. His assistant whispered to Isabella, I don't know what you're doing, but he hasn't been this stubborn in months. She laughed softly. Maybe he just needs someone to annoy him into living. A week later, she walked into the library to find Ethan at the piano, his fingers tracing the keys as if testing whether they'd still obey him. He played a slow, uneven tune, then looked up at her. Don't tell me it sounds broken. She grinned. It doesn't. It sounds alive. He laughed quietly, the sound warm and real. For the first time since they met, the room didn't feel like a hospital or a contract. It felt like a home. That night, as snow began to fall outside, Ethan sat in his study staring at a letter he'd written weeks ago, a letter meant to end things when his heart did. He tore it in half. Down the hall, Isabella hummed an old jazz tune, her voice soft against the hum of the city. And for the first time in years, Ethan Ward didn't think about dying. He thought about tomorrow. Snow began to fall over the city, soft and steady, like time slowing down. From the penthouse windows, New York looked peaceful, almost kind. Inside, the atmosphere had changed completely. Laughter had replaced silence. Music floated through the rooms. And Ethan Ward, the man who once counted days, was now learning how to live them. That morning, Isabella found him in the kitchen wearing an apron, burning something that might have been pancakes. Are you trying to start a fire? She teased. He smirked. I was attempting breakfast. Turns out money doesn't buy cooking skills. She laughed, and for a moment they looked at each other like old friends. No contracts, no lies, just two souls sharing the same fragile morning. Later, they sat together by the window, 2 mugs of coffee steaming in their hands. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was warm. Ethan said quietly, You make it too easy to forget why this all started. She turned to him. And why did it start? He hesitated. Because I thought dying was easier than being alone. Her chest ached. She reached out, touching his hand just once. You're not alone anymore. But peace never lasts forever. That same week, Isabella went downstairs to meet Mr. Harris, Ethan's family lawyer. He brought paperwork about the trust fund, things she didn't really understand. As she flipped through the pages, a number caught her eye. $500 and $1 payment issued to Isabella Moore, dated the same week she'd first met Ethan. Her stomach turned cold. The money wasn't just an offer, it was already transferred. He must have known. Her hands trembled as she folded the documents back. Mr. Harris smiled politely. Mrs. Ward will need your signature next week. She could barely nod. Her heart pounded all the way up the elevator. When she opened the penthouse door, Ethan was sitting by the fire, reading one of her favorite books. He looked up, and in that moment, she couldn't breathe. She walked straight to him, the paper still in her hand. Did you pay me? She asked softly before you even met me. He blinked, caught off guard. What are you talking about? The contract, she said, voice trembling. The money. It was already sent to my account before I said yes. He set the book down slowly. I didn't handle that. My lawyers. But you knew, she interrupted. You knew what they were doing, and you let me stand here pretending this was something real. Her voice broke, and that hurt him more than the words. Ethan rose from the chair, his tone steady but cold. I never promised you anything real, Isabella. This was a deal. You, of all people, should understand that. Her eyes filled with tears, anger and heartbreak, mixing like fire and ice. You're right, she said. I should have remembered. You only believe in contracts, not people. She turned toward the door. Behind her, his breath caught not from illness, but from regret. Wait, he said quietly. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. She stopped, but she didn't look back. Then maybe that's the problem. You were too busy preparing to die to learn how to live. The door closed softly behind her. That night, the penthouse felt empty again. Ethan sat by the fire, the book still open to a page she'd marked weeks ago. A note in her handwriting read, Hope is stubborn. It stays even when people leave. He stared at those words until his vision blurred. By morning, he was gone. Only his jacket remained draped over the piano bench, and a single envelope sat on the counter with her name written in his handwriting. When Isabella returned the next day, the house was quiet. The maid handed her the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a short letter. Isabella, thank you for reminding me what life feels like. If this is goodbye, know that I'm leaving because I finally want to fight. Please don't wait for me. Live for both of us. Ethan. Her knees gave out. She clutched the letter to her chest, tears falling onto the ink. Later that afternoon, she received a call from Boston General Hospital. There had been a complication. A patient named Ethan Ward didn't make it through surgery. The phone slipped from her hand. The world went silent. Outside, snow continued to fall soft and endless, covering the city that had just taken him away. And for the first time, Isabella realized she had fallen in love with the man she was never meant to keep. The ocean had its own rhythm here. Waves rolled against the wooden pier, soft and steady, as if time itself was breathing slower. A small coffee shop sat near the boardwalk, painted light blue, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. Above the door hung a hand-painted sign, "The Last Sunrise." Inside, Isabella Moore Ward moved behind the counter, pouring 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. It had become her morning ritual. 1 for herself, 1 for him. She never drank the second cup. It sat quietly by the window until the coffee cooled and the sun rose high. A year had passed since the phone call from Boston General. She'd left New York the next day packing only a suitcase and a few photographs. The city that once glowed with ambition felt empty without him. Too loud, too alive. Maine was different. Here, silence didn't hurt as much. It soothed. Each morning, she opened the shop at 6 served fishermen, travelers, and locals. She smiled, laughed, talked about weather and waves, but every time the bell over the door rang, a tiny part of her still hoped it might be him. In the evenings, she wrote letters she never sent. Stacks of them filled a small wooden box under her bed. Letters to Ethan about the shop, about the sunsets, about how she still heard his voice in her head when the music played. You'd laugh if you saw me now burning toast and spilling coffee just like you did. I keep expecting you to walk in and fix it. She signed every letter the same way, still yours, somewhere between the waves. Sometimes she dreamed of him, not the sick man she'd once cared for, but the one who had started to live again, the one who laughed, who played the piano off-key, who made her believe that love wasn't measured in time. She woke from those dreams with tears on her cheeks, but also a small smile, because even in dreams he always looked happy. On the anniversary of his passing, Isabella closed the shop early and walked to the edge of the pier. The winter wind brushed through her hair, cold and clean. She carried a small paper boat, something she'd folded from one of her old letters. She placed it on the water and whispered, "Wherever you are, I hope you finally saw another sunrise." The tide pulled the tiny boat away, carrying her words into the horizon. She stood there for a long time, watching until it disappeared. When she returned home that night, she set out 2 cups again. The routine felt less like pain and more like remembrance. Some love stories didn't end. They simply changed shape from presence to memory, from heartbeat to echo. And though she no longer prayed for miracles, she found herself whispering before bed, "Good night, Ethan." Outside, the ocean answered in its slow, eternal rhythm. Inside, the quiet was no longer unbearable. It was peaceful. Because deep down, Isabella knew the man she lost had already given her something she could never lose again, the courage to live. The first signs of spring reached Maine, bringing softer winds and the sound of melting snow. For the first time in months, Isabella allowed herself to travel a small coffee convention in Boston, just a weekend trip. She told herself it was business, but deep down she knew she was running from the silence again. The city felt different now. Busier, louder, but also strangely familiar, like a place she had lived in another lifetime. She checked into a small hotel near Copley Square, planning to visit the harbor the next morning. That night, as she unpacked her things, a flyer slipped from her bag. It had been tucked inside the conference brochure. Across the top, bold letters read, "Charity Gala for Cardiac Recovery Research," and at the bottom, in smaller print, "Keynote Speaker, Ethan Ward Foundation." Her breath caught. For a second, the room seemed to tilt. She blinked hard, reading it again and again. Same name, same city, same foundation title that carried her own first name, the Isabella Program. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. But her heart already knew. The next evening, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers and polished marble. Doctors, donors, and journalists filled the room, their laughter blending with the soft notes of a live piano. Isabella slipped in quietly, wearing a simple navy dress, her hair tied back like she used to when caring for him. Her palms were cold, her heartbeat anything but steady. When the host took the stage, she barely heard a word until he said, "Please welcome the man who made all this possible, Mr. Ethan Ward." Her breath stopped. Applause filled the room, and from behind the curtain he stepped out, alive. He looked different, stronger, broader, his skin no longer pale, but touched with color. The scar near his collar was faint, but visible, a reminder that the story she'd buried was never truly finished. Ethan paused under the lights, his voice calm, but deep, filled with quiet gratitude. "I was given a second chance," he said, "and I owe it to the person who believed in life when I couldn't." He spoke about the foundation, how it helped fund transplants for low-income patients, how every recovery reminded him that miracles were not about survival, but about courage. And then, as if drawn by instinct, his gaze lifted from the crowd and found her. Their eyes met. Just one glance, and the room disappeared. Isabella's fingers trembled around her clutch. He froze mid-sentence, the audience unaware of the storm rushing between them. After the speech, she turned to leave her mind spinning between disbelief and relief. But when she stepped into the corridor, a familiar voice stopped her. "Isabella." She turned. He was there, standing just a few feet away, hands in his pockets, eyes glistening with a mix of guilt and awe. "I thought," she whispered. "I thought you were gone." "I almost," was he said softly. "But a donor came through, someone you once cared for at St. Luke's. The transplant worked." She felt tears sting her eyes. "All this time. Why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted to," he admitted, "but I didn't want to ruin the life you were finally building. You gave me a reason to live, and I didn't know how to show up without taking that away from you." He stepped closer, his voice breaking. "I was wrong." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the gala faded behind the doors. Only their breathing filled the hall. Then she said quietly, "I waited for you anyway." His eyes closed, as if the words themselves were enough to heal him again. When he opened them, a tear slipped down his cheek. "Then let me spend whatever time I have left making it up to you," he said. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out, touching the side of his face, as if to confirm he was real. The warmth beneath her palm said enough. Outside, Boston streetlights flickered against the glass, and for the first time in a very long time, the night didn't feel like an ending, but a beginning. The gala was ending, but Isabella barely noticed. The sound of laughter music and champagne glasses faded into the distance as she stood in the quiet corridor with Ethan. He looked at her like he was still afraid to blink, as if she might vanish, if he did. When they finally walked outside, the spring air felt soft against the city lights. A light drizzle shimmered under the street lamps, painting everything in gold. They stopped under the awning of the hotel, neither knowing what to say first. Ethan spoke quietly. "I thought I'd never see you again. I thought it was better that way." Her voice was barely a whisper. "And now?" He smiled, small and genuine. "Now I know that living means facing the people who make it worth it." For a moment, neither moved. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box worn at the edges, as if carried through too many miles. He opened it, and inside lay the same wedding ring she'd once worn under a contract. Only now it looked different, the silver polished, the inner band newly engraved. She squinted through her tears to read the tiny words carved inside "Forever" by choice. Her hand trembled as he took it gently in his. Last time he said softly, "I married you because I was dying. This time I'm asking because I'm alive." Her heart stumbled, the world narrowing to just the sound of his voice. He went down on one knee right there on the slick marble steps of the hotel, raindrops clinging to his hair. "I don't have promises of forever," he said, "just today and tomorrow if I'm lucky, but every beat I have left, I want it to belong to you." Tears blurred her vision. A small crowd had started to notice a few guests lingering from the gala, watching in quiet awe. But Isabella only saw him. She laughed through her tears. "You're ridiculous," she whispered. Then, smiling, she knelt down with him and pressed her forehead against his. "Yes," she said, "this time I choose you too." The crowd around them erupted into soft applause, but they barely heard it. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking with emotion. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The noise, the lights, the rain. It was just them two people who had broken apart and somehow found their way back. He whispered, "Do you know what I thought about when I woke up from surgery?" She shook her head. "You," he said. "I kept thinking if I could see you again, I'd spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubted that I loved you." She couldn't speak. All she could do was hold him, her tears mixing with the rain. Later, they walked hand in hand along the harbor. The city glowed in the distance, reflected in the dark, rippling water. The storm had passed, leaving the air cool and clean. Ethan's thumb brushed her wedding band as if to confirm it was real. "Do you ever think," she asked quietly, "that maybe we were meant to meet twice, once to learn how to lose, and once to learn how to live?" He smiled. "Maybe that's what real love is, not a miracle, just a second chance." She leaned her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes to the rhythm of his heartbeat, steady, strong, and finally truly alive. For the first time, neither of them feared tomorrow, because somehow, love had rewritten the ending. Summer had returned to New York, and with it, life seemed to move brighter, faster, louder, just like it always had before everything fell apart. But this time, the city felt different to Isabella, because this time she wasn't walking it alone. Ethan and Isabella had moved back into the penthouse overlooking Central Park. The same place where they'd once been strangers now smelled of coffee music and something she hadn't felt in years: peace. The walls that had once echoed with silence now carried laughter and the low hum of a piano. Ethan had even turned the old study into a small music room. He said it helped him breathe. Some mornings she'd catch him standing on the terrace, eyes closed, face tilted toward the sunrise. His chest rose evenly, no oxygen tank in sight. Every breath was a quiet victory. They still argued sometimes about dinner work, or his stubborn way of pretending to be fine when he was tired. But even those moments felt precious because they were proof that they still had days worth fighting for. He teased her often. "You used to be the quiet one," he'd say. "And now you talk more than my doctor." She'd laugh, throwing a napkin at him. "That's because I'm the one keeping you alive." He'd grin. "I thought love was supposed to be easier." "Not with me," she'd reply, and they'd both burst into laughter. In September, Ethan launched the Isabella Foundation, dedicated to helping low-income patients receive life-saving heart treatments. He told the crowd at the opening, "This foundation exists because someone once refused to let me give up." When Isabella heard that, tears slipped down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. They were a part of this story too. That night, back at the penthouse, Ethan found her in the kitchen quietly washing 2 coffee mugs. He slipped his arms around her waist. "Do you ever miss Maine?" he asked. She smiled softly. "Sometimes. It was peaceful there. And now." She turned to face him, resting her hands over his heart. "Now I have peace here." He kissed her forehead, and for a long moment they just stood there, listening to the city outside, alive and endless. Later, they sat by the window, the same one that had once divided them. The skyline glittered under a summer rain. Ethan looked at her hand, tracing the silver ring that had come full circle. "You know," he said, "I used to think surviving was the end of the story." She smiled. "And now I know it's just the beginning." In the reflection of the window, 2 cups of coffee sat side by side, steam curling into the warm night air, no longer symbols of waiting, but of living together. The morning light crept softly through the penthouse windows, painting the walls gold. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt full, not empty. A record spun slowly in the background, playing the same jazz song that once echoed through a stormy night long ago. Ethan sat at the piano, his fingers tracing gentle notes, while Isabella prepared coffee in the kitchen. 2 cups like always, old habits that had turned into something sacred. They had made it a tradition. Every Sunday morning, no matter how busy life became, they sat together at sunrise. No phones, no emails, no distractions. Just 2 people who had already lived a lifetime in borrowed moments. She brought over the cups, placing his beside the sheet music. The smell of roasted beans and faint vanilla filled the air between them. Ethan smiled, his eyes still carrying that quiet gratitude he never stopped feeling. "You know," he said, "I used to think love was supposed to fix you, make you stronger, make everything easier." She leaned against the piano, listening. "And now," he met her gaze, "now I think love doesn't fix you. It just gives you the reason to keep going, even when you can't." Her heart swelled at his words. He said it so simply, like it was the truest thing he'd ever learned. That afternoon, they walked through Central Park, the air cool and filled with laughter. Children ran past with balloons, street performers played guitar under blooming trees. Ethan stopped by a small coffee stand buying 2 cups, even though she'd just had one. When she laughed, he said, "You never know when you'll need a refill of happiness." They sat on a park bench, watching the city move around them, alive, unpredictable, breathtaking. And for the first time, neither thought about the past or the years ahead, because this exact heartbeat of now was everything they had once prayed for. As the sun began to set, they returned home. The golden light spilled across the coffee table where their cups still waited side by side. Isabella whispered, Do you ever think about how different things would be if we hadn't signed that contract? Ethan smiled. I think about it every day, and every time I thank fate for the mistake that led me to you. She laughed softly, the sound blending with the soft hum of the record player. Later, when the city lights flickered on, they stood by the window, watching the skyline glow against the night. Two reflections merged into one. Ethan took her hand, their fingers fitting easily perfectly. Do you know the best part, he said. What she asked. I didn't survive because of medicine. I survived because you made me want to. She didn't answer. She just leaned into him, listening to the steady rhythm of a heart that once threatened to stop and now beat stronger than ever. Outside, New York moved on, but inside that high glass room, time stood still, just two hearts, one story, and a love that refused to die. Voiceover, soft cinematic. She was paid to marry a dying man, but love made both of them live. Sometimes the best stories aren't about survival, they're about finding someone who reminds you why life matters. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more tales of love, hope, and second chances. Because somewhere out there, another heartbeat is waiting for its own miracle.